Picture this. You're a lion. You've been the apex predator of your ecosystem since before your grandmother's grandmother was born. Every hoofed animal on the savannah knows your silhouette and runs. Then, one afternoon, a skinny, hairless primate walks towards you on two legs, no claws, no fangs, moving slower than a wounded gazelle. What goes through your head? If you guessed easy meal, you're not alone. A lot of predators have made that exact assumption over the centuries. And a surprising number of them have been wrong in ways that changed how scientists think about animal psychology entirely. Today, we're digging into a question that sounds simple but gets weirder the deeper you go. Do wild animals actually look at us and think we're weak? Stick with me here because the answer involves elephants who panic at the sound of a phone ringing, lions who are more scared of a human voice than a gunshot, and a mouse that can apparently smell exactly how sick you are just by walking past your bed. This is one of those topics where every answer creates three new questions, so let's just start pulling the thread. Let's begin with the obvious physical comparison, because that's where most people's minds go first. Humans are soft. We don't have thick hides, we don't have retractable claws, our teeth couldn't puncture a soda can, and our top speed on foot is embarrassing compared to almost anything that wants to eat us. A chimpanzee, pound for pound, is roughly 1.5 to 2 times stronger than an adult man. A grizzly bear could remove your head with a single paw swipe without even trying particularly hard. On paper, if this were a fair fight based on raw biology, humans lose almost every single matchup on land. And here's the thing. Animals aren't stupid. Predators are constantly running cost-benefit calculations in their heads even if they don't know they're doing math. Every potential meal gets silently measured against the risk of injury. Because in the wild, a broken leg or a torn muscle is often a death sentence. No emergency room, no antibiotics, just a slow decline. So when a leopard sees a human standing alone in tall grass, weaponless, moving awkwardly, not particularly fast, and clearly not built for close combat, there's a very real argument to be made that from a purely physical standpoint, we look like an incredible opportunity. So why doesn't every lion, tiger, and bear in the world treat us like a walking buffet? This is where things get interesting, because the answer has almost nothing to do with our muscles and everything to do with our behavior, our smell, and something researchers call the landscape of fear. Let's talk about that human voice study for a second, because it's one of my favorite pieces of research in this whole field. A team working in South Africa set up speakers in the bush and played different sounds to see how animals reacted. They played lion roars, they played gunshots, they played dogs barking, and they played ordinary human voices, just people chatting calmly about mundane things. The animals, including species that lions actively hunt like leopards, elephants, and rhinos, fled from the human voices faster and more consistently than from any other sound, including actual lions hunting nearby. Let that sink in for a second. Prey animals were more afraid of us talking about our grocery list than they were of the literal apex predator that hunts them every single day. Why would that be if we're supposedly the weak link? Because fear isn't calculated from muscle mass, it's calculated from unpredictability and from history. Lions are a known quantity. Prey species have evolved alongside lions for millions of years. They know the rules of that relationship. A zebra can read a lion's body language, judge the distance, judge the angle of approach, and make a reasonably informed decision about whether to run or keep grazing. Humans, on the other hand, are the new and terrifying variable. We show up in vehicles, we show up with rifles, we show up in groups, we use tools that can kill from hundreds of meters away with a sound like a thunderclap. Generations of animals have learned through hard experience and probably through some instinctive inherited caution too, that humans represent a threat that doesn't play by the normal predator-prey rules. So, in a strange twist, the very thing that makes us physically weak compared to a lion is part of what makes us so unnerving to everything else in the ecosystem. We're the monster nobody fully understands. But hold on, because this is where the story gets more complicated and honestly, more fun. Not every animal treats humans this way. There's a fascinating and slightly unsettling phenomenon called island tameness, and it shows up in places where animals evolved with zero exposure to humans or large predators. The Galapagos Islands are the textbook example. When Darwin showed up there in the 1830s, he described marine iguanas and finches that would practically let you pick them up. They had no fear response programmed in because nothing in their evolutionary history had ever punished a lack of fear. No predators meant no need for caution. This still happens today. Visitors to certain remote islands report birds landing on their shoulders, seals napping a few feet from tourists, animals wandering right up to camera lenses with zero hesitation. These creatures aren't judging humans as weak. They simply have no concept of us as dangerous at all because their ancestors never had a reason to learn it. This tells us something important. An animal's assessment of human strength or weakness isn't some universal instinct. It's learned, generation after generation, based on actual encounters. Which means in places where humans have historically hunted, trapped, or otherwise messed with local wildlife, animals tend to treat us with intense caution. In places where we've never shown up before, animals treat us like just another weird rock formation that occasionally makes noise. Now here's where things get strange, because there's a flip side to all this caution. Some animals don't just fear humans, they seem to actively study us, testing our reactions like they're gathering intelligence. Hyenas are a great example. Researchers who study hyena behavior around human settlements in parts of Africa have noted something almost eerie. Hyenas will approach a campsite at night, get close enough to be seen, and then retreat the moment a person stands up or shouts. Then they come back later, and closer. It looks a lot like probing, almost like they're running repeated experiments to figure out the actual boundaries of what a human will tolerate before reacting. Wolves have shown similar patterns in areas where they've lost their instinctive fear of people, circling at a distance, watching, occasionally inching forward to see what happens. This isn't about muscle. This is about information gathering. And it's honestly a little humbling because it suggests these animals aren't reacting on pure instinct. They're forming something closer to a working theory about us, updating it in real time based on our behavior. Which brings up an amazing question. If animals are constantly updating their opinion of humans based on how we act, what happens when we act scared? Turns out this matters enormously, and it might be one of the biggest factors in the entire "do they think we're weak" equation. Body language is basically the universal language of the animal kingdom. Predators are extremely good at reading confidence versus panic in another creature, because in nature, panic usually means an animal is injured, young, sick, or otherwise compromised, which makes it a much easier target. This is why safari guides will tell you, with complete seriousness, that running from a big cat is one of the worst things you can do. Running triggers a chase response that's been baked into predator brains for millions of years. Standing your ground, making yourself look larger, holding eye contact, all of that sends a very different signal, one that essentially tells the animal, the cost-benefit math you're doing right now is not in your favor. Reconsider. There's a great, slightly funny example of this with black bears. Black bears are actually not particularly aggressive toward humans most of the time. And wildlife experts frequently point out that if you act big, loud, and confident, most black bears will back off because a black bear's instinct is to avoid unnecessary risk. But a bear that has learned through repeated encounters that humans are actually pushovers, the ones that leave food out, run away, screaming, or otherwise behave like easy targets, can become what's known as a habituated or food-conditioned bear. These bears become dramatically more dangerous, not because bears got physically stronger, but because their opinion of humans changed based on direct evidence, in a very real sense. Some bears do end up concluding that humans are weak, but only after we teach them that lesson ourselves through our own behavior. That's honestly one of the wildest parts of this whole topic. Our own actions are constantly training wild animals on what to think of us. Every time a group of tourists gets too close to a bison in a national park because it looked calm and the bison doesn't react, that bison's tolerance threshold might shift slightly. Every time a monkey in a temple town successfully steals a sandwich from a tourist's hand without consequence, other monkeys watching nearby learn that humans are an unguarded food source, not a threat to avoid. Groups of macaques in parts of Asia have become so bold around tourists that they'll open backpacks, unzip pockets, and snatch phones directly out of people's hands. All learned behavior built entirely on repeated evidence that humans won't retaliate. So in these specific human-habituated contexts, Yes, some animals genuinely do seem to view humans as weak, or at least as unthreatening enough to exploit. But it's crucial to note this isn't some innate belief about human physical inferiority. It's a learned pattern based entirely on our own actions around them. Let's zoom out and talk about elephants for a second, because their relationship with humans is one of the most nuanced examples in the entire animal kingdom. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Elephants are physically capable of crushing a human without much effort. An adult elephant weighs more than a small car and can move remarkably fast when motivated. And yet, in most parts of Africa and Asia, elephants generally give humans a wide berth. And in areas with a long history of poaching, elephants show measurable, generational caution around people, sometimes even changing migration patterns to avoid human settlements entirely. Researchers have documented that elephant herds who've experienced poaching or culling operations pass down what looks like collective trauma, with matriarchs leading their families away from areas associated with gunfire or human scent, sometimes for decades after the danger has actually passed. But then you get situations like human-elephant conflict zones in India or parts of Africa, where elephants raiding crops have become bold enough to walk directly through villages, seemingly unbothered by shouting, fires, or noisemakers that used to work as deterrents. In these specific regions, elephants appear to have recalibrated their risk assessment, concluding that the benefits of raiding crops outweigh the actual danger posed by the humans defending them. Again, this isn't a belief that humans are inherently weak as a species. It's a localized, learned judgment based on specific, repeated interactions. This pattern keeps showing up over and over across completely different species, and it's honestly one of the most compelling takeaways from all this research. Animals don't seem to hold some fixed universal opinion of humans as strong or weak. They form contextual judgments based on direct experience, and those judgments can vary wildly from one population to another, even within the exact same species. Now, let's talk about something that flips this whole conversation on its head: scent. Because as much as we love to think about animal intelligence in terms of watching, learning, and calculating, an enormous amount of animal behavior around humans has nothing to do with conscious judgment at all. It's chemical. Mice, for example, have been shown in laboratory studies to detect subtle scent differences associated with stress hormones in humans and other animals. Some research even suggests certain rodents can pick up on scent cues linked to illness in nearby humans, essentially smelling weakness in a very literal, biochemical sense, long before any visual assessment comes into play. Sharks are famous for detecting blood in the water from what sounds like impossible distances, though the real number is more modest than the myths suggest, usually within a few hundred meters under good conditions rather than the wildly exaggerated smell one, drop from a mile away claims. But the underlying idea holds up. Injured or bleeding animals, including humans, send out chemical signals that predators are specifically tuned to detect, because throughout evolutionary history, an injured creature represents a lower risk, higher reward opportunity. This isn't the animal thinking humans are weak in any cognitive sense. It's a hardwired response to a biological signal that says, compromised target nearby. This distinction actually matters a lot for how we understand today's big question. A lot of animal behavior that looks like a judgment about human strength is really just automatic pattern recognition running in the background, no different than a smoke detector going off. It's not analyzing whether the fire is dangerous, it's just responding to a trigger it's built to respond to. So where does that leave the actual answer to whether wild animals think humans are weak? Here's the honest, if slightly unsatisfying, conclusion that keeps showing up across decades of behavioral research. Most wild animals don't think about humans in terms of strength or weakness at all, at least not in the way we imagine when we picture some creature sizing us up like a fighter assessing an opponent before a match. Instead, animals build a running model of risk based on scent, sound, movement patterns, past encounters, and inherited caution passed down through generations. In places where humans have historically been dangerous, that model skews heavily toward avoidance. And predators that might otherwise have the physical tools to take us on generally choose not to because the risk calculation isn't worth it. In places where humans have shown themselves to be an easy, exploitable resource, whether through careless food storage, panicked reactions, or simple lack of retaliation, that same model can shift toward boldness and sometimes genuine disregard for us as a threat. Which means, in a strange way, both sides of the original question are true depending entirely on context. Yes, some animals in some places absolutely do treat humans as easy, unthreatening targets, and their behavior around us reflects that directly. And also, yes, in many of the world's most predator dense environments, animals that could physically dominate us in a heartbeat choose caution instead, not because they respect our strength, but because they respect the unpredictable, historically dangerous reputation we've built for ourselves as a species. There's something almost poetic about that. Humans are, biologically speaking, one of the more fragile large mammals walking around this planet. No claws, no armor, no real speed to speak of. And yet we've managed to become one of the most feared entities in nature, not through physical dominance, but through tools, group coordination, unpredictability, and frankly, a long and well documented history of being extremely dangerous when provoked. Our reputation in a lot of places precedes us in ways our actual bodies never could. Before we wrap this up, let's touch on one more angle that a lot of people never think about: how differently animals react to humans depending on posture and gaze. This one genuinely surprises people every time I bring it up. Predators across the animal kingdom, from big cats to bears to certain birds of prey, respond very differently to a human standing upright and making eye contact compared to a human crouched down, moving on all fours, or lying prone. Standing upright with direct eye contact tends to register as a predator or threat signal, which is part of why safari guides insist you never crouch down or turn your back on animals like lions or bears. Crouching, running, or turning away can mimic the exact silhouette and movement pattern of prey animals. And this can genuinely flip an animal's internal categorization of you from unknown, cautious, to potential meal. Pursue. There have been documented cases of large cats that showed no interest in an upright group of researchers suddenly becoming intensely focused the moment someone crouched down to tie a shoelace or adjust equipment. The posture change alone was enough to shift the entire interaction. This is honestly one of the clearest, most concrete pieces of evidence that animals aren't making some abstract philosophical judgment about human strength. They're running pattern recognition based on shape, movement, and posture, the same way they would for any other animal in their environment. Stand like a predator, and a lot of species treat you like one. Move like prey, and that categorization can change in an instant, regardless of your actual physical capabilities. So the next time you're watching nature footage and you see a herd of buffalo stand their ground against a human observer, or a bear casually wander away from a hiking trail, or on the flip side, a monkey boldly snatching food right out of someone's hand without a hint of hesitation, you're not just watching random animal behavior, you're watching the visible result of an enormous, largely invisible calculation built from scent, sound, inherited memory, and direct past experience, all running constantly in the background of that animal's mind. Do wild animals think humans are weak? Some do, in very specific, learned contexts. Most don't think about our physical strength at all because the calculation they're actually running is about risk, unpredictability, and history, not muscle mass. And a surprising number of the most dangerous animals on the planet, creatures that could end a human in seconds without breaking a sweat, choose to avoid us entirely. Not because they respect what we could do to them physically, but because generations of experience have taught them that we're simply not worth the risk. Which honestly might be the most humbling twist in this entire topic. We didn't earn our place at the top of most food chains through strength. We earned it through reputation, through tools, and through a species wide track record that most animals have learned, one way or another, is safer to avoid than to test. And that's a strange kind of respect, isn't it? Not the kind you get from being the strongest thing in the room, but the kind you get from being the thing nobody in the room fully understands. And nobody wants to be the one to find out the hard way. If this kind of deep dive into how animals actually perceive us is the kind of thing you enjoy, there's a lot more where this came from, and honestly, the more you dig into animal cognition research, the weirder and more fascinating it gets. Thanks for sticking around for this one.